brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
The contemporary art world is vibrant and booming as never before. It's a 21st century phenomenon, a global industry in its own right. Brilliant Ideas looks at the artists at the heart of this. Artists with a unique power to astonish, challenge and surprise. In this programme, American artist Theaster Gates. Chicago artist Theaster Gates has emerged onto the contemporary art scene in the last decade with key exhibitions at galleries and festivals around the world. His work includes assemblages of objects and materials referencing human rights and the world of labour. But he's more than just a visual artist. He uses performance and music in his work. Amazing grace. And he's also become known for his Dorchester projects in Chicago's South Side, where he's taken ownership of abandoned buildings, transforming them into cultural spaces. And now he's taking on his biggest project to date, converting a derelict bank into a shared art space.
He's a modernist, I think he's a postmodernist, I think he deals with the politics of African-American life and the experience in America.
Some people have felt as though, oh, Theaster is doing too many things, like the architecture, the urban design, the urban planning, the pottery, but I think that it's all one project.
I actually think that the word artist has been too small for too long. That in the past, there may have been moments where the term meant a tremendous amount. It meant that a person could have any number of skills, including a deep knowledge of the sciences, of religion, of the physical body, of philosophy and poetry, of music, and that it all kind of landed in the word artist. But maybe even like the field of architecture, before it was called architecture, maybe it was a person who knew how to design a thing and build the thing, that over time those parts got disconnected. And so what an artist meant was something that was very, very narrow. And I think I'm just trying to fill the word up again so that it means more.
One of the things that I've seen in Theaster's art practice and admired is somewhat the fearlessness that I would say he takes to bring whatever discipline is required into the picture to make the work happen or to get the message across.
Identifying evocative objects has become central to Theaster's work. Two important pieces stand out from early in his career: the shoeshine stand and fire hoses.
I was in the Whitney Biennial in 2010, and in that biennial, I made an architectural space in the courtyard. It was a temple dedicated to very humble labor. It was dedicated to shining shoes. It struck a chord as something that was either good ritual or like bad American politics or something. And that idea that like a shoeshine stand could trigger lots of different kinds of emotions, nostalgia, anxiety, guilt, that was very exciting to me. And then there was a moment when I was trying to account for my connectedness to the civil rights movement.
Let us know that our aim is to build a better Chicago.
The civil rights movement was a really important moment in Black American history, in American history. The injustice with regard to kind of racial segregation, job opportunities, that those things had like come to a point of politically charged speech-making, protests, acts of peaceful resistance by Black people all over the country. How do you make that past moment potent again? And I felt like these fire hoses, which had been used to prevent, deter, arrest people's protesting by humiliating people, that this charged material could be used to kind of reintroduce the possibility of struggle.
Theaster laid his hands on a cache of decommissioned fire hoses and set about planning how best to turn such a powerful symbol into a work of art.
I mean, the hoses were already wrapped in with their nozzle, and I thought, I'm just going to put that thing back in the world like it was. And so I framed it. I kind of built a box around it and treated it like a portrait, like a Cornell vitrine. After I framed it, I thought, wow, this is great. You know, it was somewhere between a ready-made and a painting and a photo. And then I thought, well, this material could do so much more. And so I started to slowly just play with it, bending it, flattening it, ironing it. It felt like it was the found object, the loaded object, the color, the texture that could stand on its own as a thing, so that if there was no narrative, there was still this form that was like elegant and quiet, and then that form was also connected to this history that was like charged.
You could look at those civil rights tapestries, the fire hoses, and just see them as incredibly inventive, powerful, formal objects. But of course these things resonate with meaning. A fire hose has all sorts of connotations, but it has a very specific connotation for him as well in the context of the civil rights movement. And it's that rich layering, I think, physical layering, material layering, cultural layering, intellectual layering, that makes him, I think, such an important artist.
Ideas.
Downtown Chicago's skyline is world famous. Overlooking Lake Michigan, the city is home to an abundance of iconic buildings, an inspiring place for a would-be artist and designer. Theaster Gates grew up on the city's west side, and from a young age had a relentless thirst to understand the world.
My parents had a collection of books called Encyclopedia Britannica. And they had like the adult versions, which had really nice like black and brown spine with the gold. And then they had like these young people's Encyclopedia Britannica, which were like the white spine with like kind of colored in the middle of the spine. And I remember wanting to read the big people's Britannica because you had this sense that like if you were looking at the image of a bird, they would give you all the different names of this particular species. There was like all this stuff around this like one object. Because we have a big family, I was left alone with these books, and I was kind of left alone to figure it out. Most things in life maybe are not immediately visible. And so how do you wake up your capacity to see more, that you might understand the world more?
Theaster studied for a degree in urban planning, acquiring the knowledge that would feed into his career in the visual arts. He's now a professor in visual arts at the University of Chicago on the south side of the city. When Theaster first worked there, he was drawn to the area of Greater Grand Crossing when he sought somewhere more affordable to live.
It's a 99% African-American neighborhood. Great and normal people lived in this neighborhood, but sometimes violent things happened. This was in 2006 when I moved there. In 2008, there was the housing kind of and market crash. During that crash, a lot of buildings became abandoned, and I decided that I would acquire the building adjacent to me just to try to keep myself safe and manage what was next to me. I thought I could make it a studio space. It ended up pretty quickly becoming like a space for others.
Theaster and his expanding team redesigned and reconstructed these buildings with salvaged local materials, creating spaces for archive and community engagement. South Dorchester Avenue became the first staging post in an extraordinary artistic and personal endeavour.
There are times when making art isn't enough, and that to be black in America, if you were waiting for opportunities to have an exhibition or opportunities for people to write about your work or a venue where you might make music, you could be waiting for a very, very, very long time. I found myself preoccupied with space for the last several years because sometimes you have to build the house that you exhibit in. You have to build the house that you make music in.
Theaster has imagined programs for these abandoned spaces. He has created a life for a space that we walk by and don't even notice that we're, for all intents and purposes, dead.
I once heard Theaster talk about his projects as Lazarus projects. You know, he's not really interested in taking on a building unless he's raising it from the dead. So you won't see him going into some particularly cool space that has so much potential. It's, you know, it has to be something that's decrepit and really needs his help.
Could that architectural image of Dorchester, where people normally get through Dorchester as quickly as possible, they drive away from Grand Crossing, could I get people to want to slow down? That's exciting. Inviting people to a neighborhood that they would never go to out of psychic fear felt like a way of regenerating, reimagining a place, reloading it with promise.
There was a buzz about something interesting happening in South Chicago, but I have to say it really crystallized when he did that extraordinary project at Documenta.
Documenta is a contemporary art exhibition which takes place every 5 years in the town of Kassel, Germany. For 2012, Theaster decided to take over a dilapidated 19th century Huguenot house and use it to exchange ideas and materials with his own building back in Dorchester.
Having those raw materials go to Kassel, using them to restore the Huguenot house, making music there, bringing my friends, bringing my staff of makers, these musicians, all amazing in their own right, but all choosing to like band with me in this effort.
They created this really extraordinary renovation which became a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, a kind of total work of art.
12 ballads for Huguenot House could be seen as a love song from one abandoned building to another. For Theaster, it also represents the gift of the Chicago blues and the black voice transported to Germany.
Theaster asked some of his musicians to just make music in 6901 South Dorchester, and at the time it was an abandoned building. And it was cold. I remember that. It was cold. You could see our breath. It wasn't until maybe a month or so later that he really shared the bigger vision. A grand exchange. You know, essentially shipping this time capsule in Chicago to Kassel and just allowing it to inhabit another space.
There are times when object making doesn't work for me. When whatever I'm trying to say, I don't have the skill or material things don't have the capacity to articulate what I want. And I need sound.
There was almost 1 million people who visited Kassel through the 100 days. So it was really the moment that he really exploded onto the art scene. So it was an important staging post in his career.
Ideas.
Since Documenta in Germany in 2012, Theaster Gates' art has become increasingly sought after, and his Dorchester projects now firmly on the map. His enormous studio there encompasses both wood and metal workshops, a pottery studio and a large experimental space. But his exhibition art now centres around recovered objects and materials from his neighbourhood, like the remnants of a local hardware store.
The building was being torn down. What do you do when these important commercial moments in a city go away? You know, space was being made for new condominiums. But there was a time when the hardware store was the place where you could go and get bike inner tubes, you know, wiring for your lamp. You know, kind of before Home Depot, there was like, you know, the hardware store was kind of where you got everything, you know. And so it's really sad that these things are going away. And so I've been trying to figure out, like, well, how do I make new forms of them? And maybe even what's my relationship to these things, being a person who builds. And so you'll see remnants of the hardware store all over the studio in a way. You know, from the pegboards that had held merchandise to these cabinets that, you know, for 100 years held all of the needs of a home. I seem to be preoccupied with certain themes. Reflecting on labor is really important to me.
Theaster's recent work has included large-scale tar paintings, drawing on his own family's experience in the world of labour.
Theaster's father was a roofer. There's a materiality to the black painting that is fascinating. It's like, oh, so black painting, what is this? And until you know that it's tar, it's quite mysterious. But it also clearly means to take its place in the history of black paintings. And Goya, in the beginning of the 19th century, has what we call the black paintings. And then we have Theaster's black paintings. But now it's a black guy painting the black paintings. And it's a black guy whose black dad was putting roofs on with black tar, right? And so there's a way in which blackness just has a kind of richness that it could never have within the formalist tradition as we know it. And yet it doesn't mean that those paintings aren't formalist. You know, they are. You know, they're geometrically exquisite.
I really wanted to take on the idea that being a roofer was good enough for painting. That in a way, I could bring something of my history to this genre, to this field, and I could use a mop like one might use the brush. I could use the copper roofing nail the way one might kind of secure canvas. I could think about how the frame holds itself in space, not unlike the way a painter thinks about a canvas. Painting could use new forms. So I can thank my dad for introducing me to a way of handling a viscous material that's two-dimensional.
Themes of labour and trade continue to power Theaster's work. Today, his energy is focused on his latest project, his biggest and most ambitious yet.
In Chicago, the project that I'm most excited about is my bank. The bank was a derelict building that hadn't seen use in at least 25 years.
For the bank project, Theaster couldn't resist creating a specific piece of collectible artwork to help raise funds.
He had this ingenious idea of actually creating bank bonds, which were made out of marble that was in the building, and onto which he sort of carved certificates, if you like, for these bank bonds, which we then sold for the sum of $5,000.
So there's the building. We have the house to rock in. But then the rocking part is really exciting because it means that now these collections that have had homes on Dorchester, they now have a home where big publics can come. All of the energy that had been put into Dorchester now transfers to this bank space where even bigger, greater things can happen.
I think our most important collection is the Johnson Publishing collection, which comes from the Johnson Publishing Company, an African-American, Chicago-based company that is most known for publishing Ebony and Jet magazine. They were founded in the 1940s, and our collection contains full print runs of everything they ever published from the 1940s to the present day.
This small temple is the first of a series of temples that take on lost collections and tries to make sense of them within an architectural form. And I really, really like it a lot. You know, these books are amazing in that they didn't plan to function as an archive when they were made. They were about the present. But to look back, you know.
Did people read it when you were growing up?
Absolutely. They were all over my house. And it was a way in which black people could connect with each other around the world.
As his Stony Island Arts Bank finally opens its doors to the public, Theaster's dream to salvage knowledge and beauty within his neighbourhood is well on track.
So cool.
Of all the frontline artists working in the world today, and I'd include him in that, I think he's the least bothered about art per se. And I don't mean to say he's irreverent towards art, but art to him is not unimportant. But it's a means to a broader end. I think his aim is much more culturally, socially, and by extension politically transformative.
It's become really clear to me that when people believe in the place where they live, when they invest in the places where they live, when they live in the places that they grew up, when they love with their hearts and with their lawnmowers the places that are around them, when we make the time to know our neighbors and our friends and we say thank you to the world, beautiful and amazing things can happen. There's no doubt in my mind that art has the capacity to do things that other things in the world, other mechanisms of transformation can't do. There's no doubt. Artists don't have the burden always of having the ambition to make a difference. But can art change things? Can the act of creation, a way of dreaming in the world and then forcing yourself to do something with your hands, to take that dream and do something. Yeah. Art makes a difference.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.